back and welcome to the Constitution Line by Line. I'm political scientist Paul Fabrizio.
And I am mere historian Don Frazier.
Mere historian. How appropriate.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Just a teller of tales.
Oh, that's right. I'll let you introduce the next one then, so you can say historian.
That's right. The next roll in.
Yeah.
I'll get you.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about the Constitution line by line. Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers, Clause 14, Congress shall have the power, here we go, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. Okay.
Sounds like civilian control of the military.
It sure does. Yeah. And this can be played out in a variety of ways. First, in establishing the rules of engagement.
Sure.
What are we trying to do? Also, it's played out, and we've already talked about this before, in the declaration of war. It's also played out in the budget. You know, I hear so many people say that we need to let the military make military decisions. We need to get the politicians out of it. The reality is our system is set up with civilian control of the military. We see it here, and it's civilians who determine the budget, and it's civilians who determine then the rules of engagement.
Yeah, and the rules of how this thing will be operated.
Right. And so in determining the budget, for example, you determine what ships you have, you determine what planes you have, you determine how many forces they have, how many weapons they have. And
sometimes how they conduct campaigns.
Exactly.
Like happened during the American Civil War. Mm-hmm. So after the Battle of Ball's Bluff, which is early on in the war,
yes,
Lincoln's buddy gets killed at the Battle of Ball's Bluff. There's other high-profile people that get wounded and torn up, and it's a military disaster. At that point, Congress creates the Committee on the Conduct of the War.
Okay.
And they are constantly bringing in generals and other officers to testify before Congress on how they're actually conducting the war. And so in the back of all of these military men's minds are, I'm going to have some dough-faced senator from Wisconsin double guessing what I'm doing.
Right. Welcome to the world.
Welcome to welcome to the United States.
Yeah,
I can't imagine that happening in the Austro-Hungarian Empire or in the French Empire. I mean, it's Napoleon III. He deploys his army. Something goes bad. Hey, the people can riot. They can throw rocks at him and stuff like that. But c'est la guerre. That's just the way it rolls. And so that's an interesting distinction about the United States that it makes it fairly unique in world history.
We need to really come to grips with what this means. I think about things like makes it to the officer corps.
Correct.
I mean, in the end, Congress approves our general staff.
They do.
And, they have to vote on them. And it has happened that politicians have held up people from making it on that list for various reasons.
Correct.
So,
hang on for a second. You mean sometimes politics plays out in the military?
You better believe it. Totally ignoring the politics in the military, there is the politics that shapes the military.
I can give you an example of that from the U.S.-Mexican War.
Great.
Zachary Taylor was coming on strong. Mm-hmm. He was providing victories, and all of a sudden people started floating him as a potential presidential candidate.
Okay.
And so next thing you know, there's a new general introduced into the mix. That's Winfield Scott. Mm-hmm. And Winfield Scott gets Taylor's army. Mm-hmm. They don't ask Taylor to go finish off Mexico by invading Veracruz and marching on Mexico City. They say, no, we're going to shuttle you off to a backwater of the war, and Winfield Scott will take it from here. So give us all your good troops. We'll give you some state volunteers, and you just hold the line at Monterey and Saltillo. And that was meddling. Mm-hmm. That was pure meddling in the way the campaign was being conducted.
For political purposes.
The
beauty of it, it's amazing.
And, we're actually going to talk about the role of the president as commander-in-chief later.
Right.
but there's some interesting meddling with firing of Federalist officers during the Great Purge that Thomas Jefferson ushered into American history. But that's a story for another day.
Look at today. There is a battle going on in the military, between the military and their political masters.
Oh, absolutely.
Over, for example, the A-10, which is a plane
Yes.
that the Air Force would love to get rid of, but Congress doesn't want to get rid of it.
It's a popular airplane with the public imagination.
It certainly is. And have you ever seen it fly and do demonstrations?
I've been in the cockpit of one, brother.
There you go.
Yeah.
It is an amazing plane.
Yeah, my buddy Matt Murray,
Okay.
who is
Murray.
I grew up with him in Arlington, Texas, but he is now a pilot for United.
Okay.
He cut his teeth on the A-10. He was a big fan of the Warthog,
Okay.
and was in Gulf War I flying that weapon system. So it's an aged weapon system.
Oh, it certainly is, but we have a lot of those.
We've got a lot of those, and this one you can break it and it'll still fly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, look at how I'm gushing about it, and the Air Force High Command would rather have Joint Strike Fighters,
Right.
and would love to see that role kind of be passed on to a different sort of weapon system. And so, yeah, there's civilians, but see, there's also a political implication because where are these things built and who
Oh,
gets
of course,
the
of
contracts
course.
and all that sort
Yeah.
of stuff.
So, in other words, sometimes military decisions are made for political reasons that have nothing to do with national security or national strategy.
Correct.
You can spin it that way,
Yeah,
but the
absolutely.
reality is that there's other things going on. Another example is the USS Harry S. Truman.
Yes.
And this is an aircraft carrier that the U.S. Navy has said they want to begin the process of decommissioning.
Correct.
And the Trump administration and members of Congress have been fighting against the Navy over that. And recently the president announced that, no, the Harry S. Truman is going to continue and it's going to go through a refurbishing and extend its life. That's not what the Navy wants, because the Navy says they're thinking about their mission and how to achieve their mission, how to project American power. So they don't need that ship. But the Trump administration says, yes, we do.
Well, let me ask you about personalities. Do you think that the firing of David Petraeus was a political hit?
Okay, he
Had a girlfriend.
had a girlfriend, and he gave to his girlfriend top secret information for a book that she was writing. He was fired from his job as director of the CIA, appropriately, I believe, for that. He also was convicted.
Okay.
He went through criminal court, through criminal proceedings. He has rehabilitated his career, but he got the punishment that I believe he deserved. He did something that he shouldn't have done.
But lots of people have done that, gotten away with it.
Directors of the CIA?
Well, that may be the distinctive.
Okay.
What about McChrystal?
Okay, General McChrystal, commander of our forces in Afghanistan several years ago.
He got the sack.
He got the sack because he made all sorts of critical comments about the President of the United States in an interview with Rolling Stone magazine. Okay? And the President took umbrage to that, and so he was sacked. Okay? Political control. I'm sorry.
There you go.
I mean, I hate to say it, but the Constitution sets up a system where the politicians are in charge. You enter the military, and especially if you move up in the military, you have to accept that the politicians are in charge.
Maybe why we've never had a military coup.
You think there's a connection between that?
Yeah, I do. I do, because I think that sort of meddling keeps the military from getting too all-powerful.
Okay.
Plenty powerful.
Yeah.
But there is so much maneuvering within the military because of these political elements that I think that, they would fight each other before they fought against their own government.
I mean, we created with them a balance of power, a separation of power balance, a checks and balances kind of system.
We did.
With them, among themselves, before they have to deal with their civilian I hate to say it, masters,
overlords.
Yes. I mean, and that's the system we got. And at the same time, you can make the argument that we are bribing the military to keep them happy. They're getting $700 billion in budgetary expenses.
So we're paying them to sit there and be quiet.
Yes,
but
to go and do their job.
Remember the context that we're speaking in. The military is going to be tiny.
Yeah.
I mean, at one time, the United States Army was 16
people.
That's it. Just enough guys to keep everything oiled and in good shape up at West Point, and everybody else go home.
We were that small.
Now, I mean, at the beginning of the U.S.-Mexican War, standing army of the United States was 12,000 coast to coast. Yeah, I mean, and it's not much larger at the beginning of the U.S. Civil War. So historically, there hasn't been much to talk about because we've had a constabulary force. It's this modern era, post-World War II era, where all of a sudden we have a military that is large and ferocious.
It is. So how do you keep it under control? I mean, there's, first of all, the Constitution, which everybody in the military swears to protect and defend.
Correct.
But also...
Even Timothy McVeigh did that.
Yeah, interesting.
And he interpreted it slightly differently than was intended.
He did. But you also have control through their budget.
Correct.
And you have control through the rules that you set up. You have control through who makes it to the officer, the general officer staff, and who gets promoted in there.
Yeah.
So there's various ways to really set this up.
Interesting that this clause seems to have been scalable.
Yeah, I don't think the framers intended that.
Well, I guarantee they didn't intend it. If you can only raise an army for an appropriation of 2 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting that it still kind of works.
Yeah. There's some, how do I say it, genius.
Yeah.
At this, and I think it's because the framers were real politicians.
Yeah.
Who were frustrated by the British control they had over them and wanted to avoid those mistakes, but were wary of going too far in a different direction.
Correct.
And so,
like Ben Franklin wanting to, make the turkey the national bird.
Yeah, exactly.
The national language be German.
Yeah, no.
That's a radical approach.
Yeah. No, but
this is British, only better.
But what I think is the key is they never gave anybody absolute control.
Correct.
I mean, who makes war? Well, in the end, the president does, but Congress has to come up with if you're going to declare war, Congress has to say we're going to declare war, and Congress has to do the funding.
That's right, even if you don't declare war.
Yeah.
Even if you declare an endless war.
Yeah. And I think the funding is something that we don't think about as that much. But you go back to the previous clause to the one we're talking about. Again, we're talking about Clause 13, but Clause 12 talks about the appropriation of money. Mm-hmm. That's Congress's job, the power of the purse. And if you control the purse, you control an awful lot.
Yeah, just ask your wife.
Okay, I will. Honey?
Can I have a check for a haircut? All right. Anything else? Or a head polish?
I just got a haircut. Not a head polish. All right, we're done with this. What do you say?
So that's our line.
That's our line.
All right, we'll pick up the next line next episode. Thanks.